Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a story of tension, courage, and transformation. One that starts with a seemingly routine encounter, but unravels into a powerful tale of resilience and justice. Join us as we follow the journey of an FBI agent who faces down bias with remarkable composure, leaving everyone speechless in her wake. In the quiet expanse of Riverside Park, the afternoon sun dipped low, casting long, stretching shadows across the meticulously kept grass. The gentle breeze barely stirred the leaves on the trees, creating an almost surreal calm. Officer John Carter, a veteran of the Riverside Police, patrolled the area, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape with a practiced gaze. For years, Carter had walked these paths, his presence a steady fixture like the ancient oaks that lined the walkways. Today, however, a strange unease knotted his stomach, a gut feeling that something was amiss in this serene setting. His years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, to heed the whisper of suspicion when it flickered in his mind. And today it flickered insistently. As he rounded a bend, his eyes landed on a solitary figure, a woman sitting alone on a park bench. Her posture relaxed as she read from a book resting on her lap. Her presence was an anomaly in the usual panorama of joggers and dog walkers. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that seemed out of place against the casual backdrop of the park, she exuded an air of calm authority that piqued Carter's interest. She was black, her well-dressed appearance and composed demeanor marking her as distinct in this predominantly white neighborhood. Carter's steps slowed as he approached, his senses sharpening. He cleared his throat slightly, adopting the friendly yet authoritative tone he used when something needed to be clarified without causing alarm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice firm but not unkind. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The woman slowly raised her eyes to meet his, her expression unreadable. There was no hint of surprise at his question, only a measured calmness that seemed to unsettle him more than reassure. She placed a bookmark in her book, closed it gently, and placed it on her lap, her hands resting atop it as if to signal she was giving him her full attention. "Enjoying my afternoon?" she replied simply, her voice smooth and controlled, devoid of any edge that might indicate fear or deference. Carter frowned slightly, his unease growing. This park was rarely this empty at this hour, and her solitary figure now seemed even more out of context. "This park is usually empty around this time," he pressed. "Are you sure you're not waiting for someone?" "No, officer," she said, her eyes locking onto his, unblinking and confident, just taking in the peace and quiet. The calm assurance in her voice threw him off balance. Most people exhibited at least a slight nervousness when approached by a police officer, but she did not. It was as if she had expected him, had prepared for this very conversation. That alone was enough to tighten the coil of suspicion in his stomach. "Can I see some ID?" he asked, the question more an accusation than a request. Her gaze did not falter. "Am I being detained?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with a slight challenge. "Just routine, ma'am," Carter replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't look like you're from around here." She sighed softly, a sound of weary resignation, as if she had seen this scene play out 100 times before. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a wallet and carefully handed over her ID to him. Carter took it, his eyes scanning the name, Special Agent Maya Williams, Federal Bureau of Investigation. His heart skipped a beat. FBI? This woman was an FBI agent? That couldn't be right. There was no way someone like her, someone who looked like her, could hold that kind of position. He tried to shake off the doubt, but it clung to him stubbornly. "You'll need to come with me," he said, his voice now hard, the earlier pretense of friendliness gone. "We need to verify this ID at the station." Maya didn't move, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. Carter couldn't tell what she was thinking, but he sensed that she wasn't going to come quietly. His hand moved to the cuffs at his belt, and this time, he pulled them out. "Stand up," he ordered. Maya rose to her feet slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. She wasn't giving him any excuse to escalate the situation, but she also wasn't cowering. A small crowd had started to gather. Sensing that something wasn't right, Carter reached for her wrists, his hands trembling slightly as he roughly pulled them behind her back. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into her skin, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The weight of history pressed down on her in that moment. Of all the black men and women who had stood in her shoes, unjustly accused and treated like criminals simply for existing. "Let's go," Tom muttered, steering her toward the patrol car. The onlookers watched, some pulling out their phones to record the scene as it unfolded. Maya could hear their murmurs of disbelief, but she kept her composure. This wasn't over. As they reached the patrol car, Officer Carter opened the door and guided Maya inside. His grip was firm, but there was a hesitation in his movements now, a flicker of doubt. He slammed the door shut and took a deep breath, trying to shake the growing sense of unease gnawing at his insides. Inside the car, Maya sat still, her hands cuffed behind her back. Her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. Officer Carter climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced as he replayed the last few minutes. For the first time, a small pit of dread began to form in his stomach. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Maya's for a brief second. There was something unsettling in her gaze, something knowing, something he hadn't anticipated. "What were you doing in that park?" he asked, trying to reassert control over the situation. Maya's voice was steady when she answered. "I told you. I was enjoying my day." Carter clenched his jaw. "A woman like you just sitting around reading. Doesn't add up." Maya raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unwavering. "A woman like me?" He didn't answer, instead turning his focus back to the road. He knew what he was implying, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Not to her, and certainly not to himself. His grip on the wheel tightened as they drove through the city streets. But for Tom, the ride felt much longer than usual. In the back seat, Maya kept her gaze out the window, her thoughts drifting to the many black women who had been in her shoes before her. How many times had this same scene played out across the country? How many women had walked away unharmed? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain. This time, it wouldn't in the same way. Unraveling consequences as the patrol car rolled through the streets. Tension sat like an unwelcome passenger between them. The weight of the situation was beginning to press harder on Officer Carter. His eyes flickered between the road and the rearview mirror, catching brief glimpses of Maya's calm face. She didn't fidget or speak, and that silence only amplified his discomfort. He wasn't accustomed to second-guessing himself. After all, he'd made plenty of arrests in his career. Some were routine, others more difficult, but none of them ever left him feeling like this. Something about this situation felt wrong, but pride kept him on his course. He couldn't back down now, not in front of the bystanders who had been watching, and certainly not in front of this woman who seemed to embody everything that rattled him. As the precinct loomed in the distance, Tom's chest tightened. The precinct was his home turf, a place where he was in control. But now, for the first time in years, he didn't feel sure of himself. The gravity of who Maya Williams was, an FBI agent, nagged at him. Even worse was the question of what would happen when the truth came out. His fingers tapped nervously against the steering wheel as they approached the station. Behind him, Maya's calm exterior remained unshaken, though her mind was anything but still. She had been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. She could feel the weight of every black woman who had ever been unjustly arrested bearing down on her. And that knowledge carried a profound responsibility. In her mind, this wasn't just about her. It was about all of them. And while she had the power to defend herself in this situation, she thought of those who didn't. They pulled into the precinct parking lot, and Tom parked the car abruptly, his mind spinning with a mixture of dread and stubbornness. He stepped out and walked around to open the door for Maya, more harshly than he intended. His grip on her arm as he led her inside the station was firmer than necessary, betraying his growing anxiety. As they walked through the station's entrance, the usual noise of ringing phones and chattering officers slowed to a hum. Heads turned, There was something about seeing a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs walking confidently alongside an officer that made everyone pause. Even though no one spoke, Tom could feel the shift in the air. Some officers raised their eyebrows in surprise. Others muttered to their partners. They all knew something was different about this one. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Officer Jenkins, an experienced member of the force, quickly stood up from his desk as he noticed the pair. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern as he approached Officer Carter. "Tom, what's going on?" Jenkins asked, his voice low but firm, his eyes darting between Maya and Carter. "Just routine," Carter muttered, guiding Maya toward the processing desk. Though his voice lacked conviction, Jenkins followed closely, his suspicion growing. "Routine," he echoed, clearly not convinced by Carter's terse reply. At the processing desk, Carter felt the weight of eyes upon him. He clumsily attempted to input details into the computer, his hands trembling slightly. Maya stood beside him, silent and composed, scanning the room with a discerning gaze. She could see officers exchanging glances, the confusion and intrigue palpable. The silence grew louder. Almost expectant. Finally, Captain Martinez emerged from his office, his sharp gaze cutting through the tension. "Grady, what's happening here?" the captain demanded, his tone indicating he expected a full explanation. Carter struggled to find his words, his discomfort evident. "There was some suspicious behavior in the park," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. "Suspicious behavior?" Captain Martinez repeated, his expression skeptical. Before Carter could elaborate, Maya spoke up, her voice clear and authoritative. "Captain, I'm Special Agent Maya Williams, FBI. Officer Carter has my credentials." The room fell silent for a moment as the gravity of the situation settled. Captain Martinez, with a swift motion, gestured for Carter to hand over the ID. He examined it briefly, then turned a stern gaze back to Carter. The captain's disappointment was palpable. "Agent Williams, I apologize for any inconvenience this has caused. We'll resolve this matter immediately," he stated, the formality of his tone doing little to mask his irritation. As Martinez directed Maya out of the handcuffs, Carter stood frozen, the reality of his misjudgment dawning on him. The repercussions of his actions were now beginning to unfold, threatening not just his career, but the integrity of the precinct. With a respectful nod to Maya, Captain Martinez escorted her out of the precinct, his demeanor apologetic yet composed. Carter, left amidst his colleagues' murmurs, felt the sting of professional shame and personal regret, knowing his judgment had been clouded by biases he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. As dawn crested the horizon, Officer John Carter arrived early at the precinct, his determination solidified. He had spent a restless night contemplating the profound implications of his actions, realizing that true change must come from within. This morning, he wasn't just ready to apologize to Agent Maya Williams. He was prepared to learn and grow from the experience. Upon entering the precinct, Carter headed straight to Captain Martinez's office. The captain, already at his desk, looked up with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Carter," he acknowledged in a measured tone. "What can I do for you?" "Sir, I've come to discuss yesterday's incident." Carter began, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I've realized the gravity of my mistake, and I'm here not just to apologize, but to ask for guidance on how I can make things right." Captain Martinez regarded him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sit down. Carter, let's talk about what happened and how we can ensure it never happens again." Carter explained his plan to engage in training programs focusing on cultural sensitivity and bias awareness, expressing his desire to lead community outreach initiatives to rebuild trust. He admitted his need for a deeper understanding of the community he served, emphasizing his commitment to changing his approach to policing. The captain listened intently, then spoke thoughtfully. "It's good to see you taking responsibility. Carter, I appreciate your willingness to improve. I'll support your involvement in the training programs, and we'll discuss further steps you can take. We need to show the community that we learn from our mistakes." Feeling a weight lift slightly, Carter thanked the captain and left the office with a newfound sense of purpose. As he walked through the precinct, he felt a resolve to not only restore his reputation, but also contribute positively to the fabric of the community he had sworn to protect. With a plan in action, Carter focused on the upcoming community forum scheduled for that evening. It would be his first step toward mending fences, a chance to listen, learn, and engage with the community members directly affected by the biases he had once embodied. That night, as he stood before a gathering of community leaders and residents, Carter took a deep breath and began to speak. He acknowledged his past mistakes openly and committed to specific actions he would take to ensure he and his department could serve better and more justly. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but John Carter was ready to walk it, guided by a sincere commitment to change and a deep desire to heal the wounds of the past. In the weeks following the community forum, Officer John Carter dedicated himself to a rigorous schedule of training and community engagement. He attended workshops on racial bias, participated in dialogue sessions facilitated by community leaders, and volunteered for programs designed to bridge the gap between the police and the neighborhoods they served. One pivotal event was a roundtable discussion with local youth, where Carter listened more than he spoke, absorbing the stories and experiences of those who had felt marginalized by law enforcement. These interactions, though often uncomfortable, were enlightening and pushed him to confront uncomfortable truths about the practices of his profession and his own actions. Simultaneously, Carter worked closely with Captain Martinez and the rest of the precinct to implement policy changes that emphasized de-escalation, accountability, and transparency. They introduced body cameras, set up a community oversight committee, and increased public access to police activity reports to build trust and ensure accountability. Throughout this period, Carter kept in contact with Agent Maya Williams, who provided guidance and resources from her extensive experience in the FBI dealing with civil rights issues. Her mentorship was invaluable, helping Carter navigate his journey toward becoming a more empathetic and effective officer. As Carter made progress, both personally and professionally, the local newspaper picked up on his story. They published an article detailing his transformation and the steps he was taking to make amends. The community's response was mixed, some skeptical, others cautiously optimistic, but many appreciated the genuine efforts being made. Months later, at another community meeting, Carter stood up to share his journey since the incident with Agent Williams. He spoke of his mistakes, the lessons learned, and the measures he had helped implement to ensure such errors would not be repeated. He extended an invitation to the community to continue holding him and the precinct accountable, emphasizing that lasting change required persistent effort and collaboration. The meeting ended with a round of applause, not just for Carter, but for the possibility of renewal and change. While challenges remained, and trust was slow to rebuild, the foundation for a new and improved relationship between the Riverside Police and its community had been laid, all sparked by one profound mistake that catalyzed a deep transformation. Months turned into a year since the incident that had altered the course of Officer John Carter's career. He continued his commitment to personal growth and community engagement, becoming a symbol of reform within the Riverside Police Department. His story had not only reshaped his own life, but also inspired others within the force to reflect on their practices and attitudes. The anniversary of the incident brought about a significant event, a community celebration in Riverside Park, the very place where the confrontation with Agent Maya Williams had occurred. The event was designed to foster unity and show the tangible results of the past year's reforms. Activities included workshops, speeches, and demonstrations of the new community policing strategies that had been implemented. Agent Williams returned to Riverside to speak at the event, marking her first public appearance in the community since the incident. Her speech highlighted the importance of resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the importance of community in enacting systemic change. She commended Officer Carter and the Riverside Police for their efforts in transforming their approach to policing. As the day concluded, Carter and Williams stood together, addressing the crowd. They spoke about the importance of continued vigilance in the fight against bias and the necessity of partnership between law enforcement and the community. The event was covered by local and national news, spreading the story of Riverside's transformation far and wide. It offered a blueprint for other departments struggling with similar issues, showing that change is possible with dedication and openness to reform. In the quiet moments after the celebration, Carter reflected on the journey. The road had been difficult, fraught with challenges and setbacks, but the progress made was undeniable. He knew the journey was far from over, but he felt prepared to continue pushing forward, guided by the lessons learned from that pivotal encounter in the park. As the influence of Riverside's transformation rippled outward, Officer John Carter found himself at the forefront of a national conversation on police reform. His story, one of personal redemption and institutional change, became a case study in conferences and training seminars across the country. Invitations to speak at law enforcement academies, universities, and public forums poured in. Carter used these platforms to advocate for continuous education and awareness within the police force, emphasizing the crucial role of community engagement in law enforcement. His talks often highlighted the practical steps Riverside had taken, such as the integration of community feedback into everyday policing and ongoing bias training. Meanwhile, back in Riverside, the police department continued to build on the groundwork laid over the past year. New recruitment policies prioritize candidates with backgrounds in social work and psychology, aiming to diversify the skills within the force. The Community Oversight Committee expanded its role, now participating directly in the department's policy-making processes. The positive changes within the community were palpable. Crime rates in areas that had previously mistrusted the police began to fall, as residents started cooperating more with investigations, feeling confident that their voices were heard and respected. Youth programs sponsored by the department helped build early relationships between officers and community members, laying a foundation for mutual respect and understanding. On a personal level, Carter deepened his understanding and empathy through his interactions across the nation. Each conversation and each story shared added layers to his perspective, enriching his approach to his duties. As the second anniversary of the incident approached, Riverside prepared to host a national symposium on police reform, inviting leaders, activists, and law enforcement professionals from around the country to discuss strategies for change and to witness firsthand the reforms Riverside had implemented. The symposium was a resounding success, with panels discussing a variety of topics related to justice, equity, and the role of policing in modern society. Carter and Williams delivered a joint keynote address, now partners in advocating for reform. Their speech underscored the theme of the symposium: unity and renewal, policing for a new era. As the event closed, Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead remained daunting, filled with challenges yet to be faced, but he was now armed with a community and a network committed to genuine reform. With each step forward, he remembered the pivotal moments that had set him on this path, recognizing that real change often starts with difficult introspections and the courage to embrace transformation. In the years that followed, the impact of Riverside's reforms and the national dialogue it sparked led to broader shifts in policing practices across the country. Officer John Carter, now promoted to lieutenant, took on a greater leadership role, both within his department and in national reform efforts. His commitment to change never wavered, driven by the memory of that fateful encounter in Riverside Park. Under his leadership, the Riverside Police Department became a model for others, showcasing how deep-seated changes in training, and community relations could lead to substantial improvements in police community dynamics. The department's focus on transparency and accountability led to a significant decrease in incidents of excessive force and complaints against officers. Lieutenant Carter also helped establish a mentorship program for young officers, emphasizing ethical policing and the importance of community engagement. This program not only prepared new recruits for the complexities of modern policing, but also instilled in them a sense of duty to act as guardians of their communities. The National Symposium on Police Reform, initially sparked by Riverside's example, became an annual event, growing each year in scope and influence. It provided a platform for sharing best practices, discussing ongoing challenges, and forging collaborations between law enforcement agencies, community leaders, and policymakers. During one of these symposiums, on its 5th anniversary, Lieutenant Carter was honored with a national award for his contributions to police reform. In his acceptance speech, he reflected on the journey from a critical mistake to a transformative movement. He dedicated the award to the community of Riverside and to Agent Maya Williams, whose grace under pressure had been the catalyst for change. I stand here today because of a community that demanded better and a colleague who deserved better, Carter said, his voice resonant with emotion. This honor belongs not to me, but to every officer who has embraced the challenge of change, and every community member who has joined us in partnership. As the applause filled the room, Carter's thoughts drifted back to that day in the park. The lessons learned from that incident had reshaped his understanding of his role as a police officer. It wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about serving and protecting with compassion, respect, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Looking ahead, Lieutenant Carter continued to advocate for ongoing education and adaptation within the policing profession. He often said, "Reform is not a destination, but a continuous journey." With each step forward, he remained committed to leading by example, ensuring that the legacy of Riverside's transformation would inspire positive change for generations to come. Over a decade after the incident that changed his life and career, Lieutenant John Carter prepared for his retirement from the Riverside Police Department. His tenure had seen substantial positive changes, not only within his own department, but also across the nation, influenced by the principles he had championed. On his last day, the department organized a farewell ceremony attended by officers, community leaders, and even Agent Maya Williams, who had become a close ally and friend. The room was filled with emotions as colleagues and community members shared stories of how Carter's leadership had impacted their lives and the broader community. Agent Williams took the podium to speak about their first encounter, which had sparked such profound change. John showed us all that it is possible to turn a moment of failure into a lifetime of advocacy and leadership, she said. His dedication to reform has taught us the value of empathy and the importance of community partnership in policing. Carter, deeply moved by the words spoken in his honor, addressed the gathering one last time. "When I started my career, I thought I knew what it meant to serve and protect," he reflected. "But it was you, the community, and the many faces that have become my family here, who taught me the true meaning of those words. The badge I wore every day was not just a symbol of authority, but of service, trust, and mutual respect." As the ceremony concluded, Carter unveiled a new initiative funded by a grant he had helped secure, the Community Policing Leadership Academy. This academy was designed to train future law enforcement leaders in the principles of community engagement, ethical policing, and transparent governance that he had upheld. With a final standing ovation, Carter stepped down from the podium, his legacy cemented in the foundations of a transformed police department and a community that had grown stronger and more cohesive. In retirement, Carter planned to continue his work as a consultant and speaker, spreading the message of reform and community collaboration to law enforcement agencies around the world. His story remained a powerful testament to the impact one individual can have when they commit to real change. Years later, the Riverside Police Department maintained its reputation as a model of community policing, a testament to the enduring power of Carter's reforms. The Community Policing Leadership Academy thrived, producing leaders who carried forward his legacy of integrity and community partnership. Lieutenant John Carter's career had begun with a mistake, but it ended with a legacy that would inspire and influence the future of policing far beyond the borders of Riverside. His journey from a moment of crisis to a catalyst for national change underscored a fundamental truth. Real transformation begins with the courage to confront and learn from one's failures, and the conviction to lead by example. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of resilience, justice, and transformation. We hope this journey has inspired you to reflect on the power of courage, grace, and empathy in challenging situations. Stories like these remind us that true strength comes not just from authority, but from understanding and integrity. Stay tuned for more stories that spark reflection, ignite change, and encourage us all to build a fairer, more just world. Thank you for watching.